Hey, we are talking a little sports today, and I want to mention that as you and I are recording, tonight is a pretty big moment in the history of Monday Night Raw. Joe Tessitore, a guy who has called, I'm talking about real big time sports. Whether you're talking about Monday Night Football, you're talking about top ranked boxing, you're talking about BCS games for college football, Joe Tessitore is synonymous with major sports. And tonight, is his Monday Night Raw debut. He's going to be working closely with Michael Cole. Michael Cole is a big advocate for this. I know that TKO is trying to get more into a more sports centric feel. You know, they've got a lot of partnerships with Fanatics, and so they're just tied in with all these other sports now. Joe Tessitore is going to be interesting to say the least. I think a lot of people are going to wonder what's his product knowledge? How familiar with this is he going to be? But anyone who really understands calling college football knows, hey, man, it's not like the NFL. And the NFL certainly has a lot of parity. But I'm saying in college football, man, it's a new crop of kids and skills that you got to memorize every single season. I'm pumped to see what Joe does tonight. As a fan, what do you think about Joe Tessitore calling Monday Night Raw tonight?
When I first heard the news, Conrad, man, kind of multiple thoughts. First one came to my mind was without risk, there's no reward. I don't want to say this is a big gamble because Raw has been around 30 plus years and everything that goes with that. Joe's not going to be running solo and all the things, and I'm sure he's prepped and all that. But Conrad, I did a media day in Sioux Falls last Friday, and went in, got interviewed, did the radios and TVs and all that. But anyway, I got interviewed by, gosh almighty, oh, I'm forgetting the guy's name. Apologies. But anyway, sat down with him, and he's like, yeah, my day gig is the weatherman. I'm like, interesting. And he goes, yeah. Anyway, he knew his wrestling. I said, I've been interviewed about every Saturday morning for about 7 years when I broke in by another weatherman. And a lot of folks didn't really realize that Dave Brown, Lance Russell, Dave Brown, Memphis, Tennessee. Dave, Lance was the general manager and knew TV inside and out and everything that goes with that. But Dave was the weatherman on ABC, and he did the big jump to NBC, WMC TV, and understanding that dynamic of the people in Memphis, and still to this day, people talk about this, is that, the weatherman, especially back in that era, prior to cable TV or the big thing is he's not just really a local celebrity, but in a lot of ways, you trusted your weatherman. Now they're about half right, but still people tune in, and the weather, believe it or not, always gets, the monster ratings because people want to know what's coming up and they trust the weatherman. I say this to say, I think Joe has a lot of positive momentum going with him, in the fact that people know him, they know his voice. I'm not saying the wrestling world, but just as in the sporting world, and that crossover is the $1 million question. We know that MMA and professional wrestling, I don't say completely different audiences, but there are different audiences in basketball and football and baseball and NASCAR and just all the different sports. They all have different demos and different dynamics on this. But Joe has a familiarity and been in high pressure situations. But it's all going to come down to what you just said. How well does he really know the product? And Conrad, I'm sure if we sat down and I started telling you some ins and outs about the mortgage business, you would be able to catch it. I mean, before I got a few words out, because you know the business inside and out. Joe's stepping up to the plate. I hope he understands the business, because that's what it's going to come down to. It's to me, it's really that simple.
Hey, let's talk about everything else that's happened in wrestling, because boy, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Like, since you and I got together, I can't believe this just.
I go ahead. Now go ahead.
Go ahead.
The Joe Tessitore. I had a question. Did they say, is that just for, like, McAfee's gone away? Is Joe just for the season, or is he full time now?
Joe's the full-time announcer
For Raw when they make the move to Netflix.
Joe is the announcer tonight.
And for the foreseeable future.
Joe is the announcer until
Okay.
Joe is the announcer. Now, if Vince was here, he'd be the announcer until Halloween Havoc, and then he's shit canned and we never hear from him again. But Joe is the announcer.
Hey, it's going to be interesting, pal. Those are big, big, big shoes.
It is. It is a big opportunity. I mean, think about all the voices we've had of Monday Night Raw and through the history. It's not that many.
No.
There have been some stop-offs and some experiments, but I'm talking about the voice of Monday Night Raw. A lot of people would say, is it JR? Is it Michael Cole? And now, is it Joe Tessitore? Like,
that's what I'm saying.
This feels like it could be a passing of the baton. So we'll see.
So, real quick, Raw had Vince, then JR, then Michael Cole. That's really the three, correct?
Yeah, there were others along the way.
But nothing full-time, did they?
Well, they tried several different experiments, but in the end, it felt like for several years they were trying to find a replacement for JR, and he just couldn't find anybody that he really liked. Remember, he tried to hire Mike Goldberg from the UFC.
And Adam Lee, right?
No? Yeah, Mike Adamle. Coach was through there. I mean, there were a lot of different folks who had a shot.
Yeah.
There was even an experiment a few years ago where they were, Victor Joseph and a few other folks. But I'm talking about when people think about the voice of Monday Night Raw. You're right. We did start with Vince.
A lot of stutter starts. I'm just going through
so many.
Yeah.
Is this the next one, or is this a commitment? I think the difference is Vince is gone. Joe's such a big name. They don't want to have a public failure. I think it's bad for everybody involved. I don't think Nick Khan is going to allow that to happen. I think Joe Tessitore is going to be here for the long haul. And think about that. If you really do wind up with Joe Tessitore on Raw and Pat McAfee on SmackDown,
interesting.
Man, that's cool. That's a lot of crossover. That's a lot of firepower, especially behind the announce desk. And then you garnish it up with some Corey Graves, some Wade Barrett, some Michael Cole. It does feel like Michael Cole's starting to maybe take a step back. And so if it does become Wade Barrett and Corey Graves or whoever else it is, but when it's all said and done, if it's Joe Tessitore on one show and Pat McAfee on the other, that's a hell of a coup for TKO.
At the end of the day, they're getting away from wrestling.
Yes.
They are.
And not in a bad way. I mean, that sounds negative, but I'm saying
okay, if that came out negative, I'm just saying they are moving away.
They're not making wrestling feel like this segregated thing. They're trying to put it all together. Like, I don't know if you watched the game as you and I were recording last night. That was the big Vegas game, which was USC and LSU.
Set a record at Allegiant Stadium.
Did you watch the game at all?
Yeah, not play by play, but yes, enough.
Did you see any commercials? They always have like a tourism thing for whenever they do like a Vegas game like that.
Yeah.
So they had a Vegas commercial, and man, they were very careful not to use any allegiances for any specific teams. But you would see a woman wearing a purple jersey with no Viking logos, and then she'd put on like a Viking hat. And then, so you saw all the like super fan accoutrement, if you will, for these different franchises. But the thing you saw over and over and over was a super fan holding up the big gold belt from the WWF, like the one that Cody has. You saw that logo very prominently all over that Vegas commercial. And it was like, you know what? They didn't want to pay a licensing fee for the NBA or for baseball or for basketball or the NFL, whatever. They didn't want to do that. But WWE was like, oh, yeah, you can use our belt, no problem. Now, there were no superstars represented. The guy wasn't wearing anybody's merch necessarily. But that belt was really prominent. And I was like, dude, they're swinging for the fences. They're trying to make wrestling not this niche thing. They want it to become more and more mainstream. And if you take a look at the way the UFC was positioned once upon a time, they were banned on pay-per-view. They'd lose their building and they'd have to run in fucking Mobile, Alabama on 3 days' notice sort of thing. And now you see what it has become, where it is really mainstream and global. I think that's what they're trying to do here. And anytime you can have someone like Tessitore or someone like Pat McAfee, they lend that credibility to your brand. I think it's a home run for WWE. I'm pumped for Joe and WWE.
Well, I'm pumped for the industry because just as we're saying all this, what a freaking opportunity for AEW.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it is plant your flag in the ground where the best wrestle. some things you think change but anyway, a way to differentiate the brands. I think it's an opportunity for the industry as a whole. It's very cool. Interesting. I got to check that Vegas spot out. That's really interesting.